As most of you know, I teach philosophy at Oklahoma City University, and in my teaching of philosophy and in my reading of philosophy, I get to read a lot of Plato and Aristotle. And while there is much in Plato and in Aristotle that I appreciate, the more I read Plato and Aristotle, the more I am struck by how their positions of power and privilege influence their philosophies, especially when it comes to their political views and their criticisms of democracy. If you've read Plato or Aristotle, you know that they are not fans of democracy. Plato believed that a monarchy was the best form of government, and conveniently for him as a philosopher, he believed that only philosophers should be kings, because only philosophers had access to true wisdom and to knowledge of the eternal forms of goodness and justice that one needs to rule in a society. Aristotle, in a similar way, a little bit different, but Aristotle argued that only persons who have leisure time to cultivate both moral virtues and intellectual virtues should participate directly in the political process, thus precluding the political participation of the vast majority of persons in the society of his time. Their positions of power, their positions of privilege, leads them to a kind of elitism that tends to lead them to reject democracy as being a good form of government. Unfortunately, Plato's and Aristotle's anti-democratic perspectives get carried over into Christian political thought, owing to Plato's and Aristotle's influence on two of the most influential Christian theologians in the history of Christian thought, Augustine and Aquinas, respectively. Augustine, who lived from 354 to 430 CE, not too long after Christianity became an acceptable religion in the Roman Empire under Constantine, and during Augustine's life, Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire under the Emperor Theodosius. And then Thomas Aquinas, who lived from 1225 to 1274, Augustine and Aquinas were two of the most influential apologists for the church's acceptance of the autocracy of empire. They were the two most influential apologists for the church's acceptance of the autocracy of empire. And they used the philosophical framework of Plato through Plotinus, someone who followed Plato's perspectives in the case of Augustine. So Augustine learned about Plato not directly from Plato, but through the Neoplatonic philosopher Plotinus. And then in the case of Aquinas, he was, for the most part, influenced by Aristotle. And so both Plato and Aristotle influenced Augustine and Aquinas in their case for the acceptance of autocracy over democracy. And eventually, this gets expressed in things like the divine right of kings and the emphasis on the importance of following the will and the dictates of the king in order to be a faithful Christian in the world. Now, even though Christianity was compromised by autocracy before Augustine was born and long before Aquinas was born, even though Christianity accepted autocratic forms of leadership before Augustine and Aquinas were around, the anti-democratic influence of Plato and Aristotle on Augustine and Aquinas still plays a role in developing and perpetuating Christian political thought that is supportive of autocracy. Now, don't want to pick on Christianity alone. There are forms of autocratic thinking in other world religions, and religious nationalism based in other world religions also ends up leading to supporting autocratic political structures as well. But in our society, the fact that Christian political thought is supportive of autocracy and autocratic movements is more germane to our particular situation. And it shouldn't come as a surprise that many of the autocratic movements in the West have been cloaked in Christian language. They've been cloaked in Christian thought that is supportive of autocracy.